This is part 1 of the notes for Unit 6, Cell Energy. So when we talk about energy, we're talking about metabolism in organisms. Metabolism is the sum total of all the chemical reactions occurring within an organism, and this includes both building food molecules and breaking down food molecules. Now, not every organism can build their own food molecules. This is an anabolic process. It is endergonic. It requires an input of energy. And the main source of these molecules that are built that all other organisms have to consume is called photosynthesis. Metabolism also includes breaking down food molecules, and this is a process that occurs in all living things, all cells. This is a catabolic process. It is exergonic, releases energy, and in most organisms, the main source of breaking down food molecules is cellular respiration. Remember, of course, that almost all of the energy on Earth originates in the sun. There are a few organisms here and there that are able to use chemical processes to produce energy for their reactions, but most of the organisms on Earth get their energy ultimately from the sun. Of course, we know from previous learning that there is a flow of energy from the sun through the living biosphere. We see here the sun, of course, provides the energy for photosynthesis to occur in plants and algae and certain other bacteria that can undergo photosynthesis. This is a way that energy is stored in the chemical energy is stored in carbohydrates, and then those carbohydrates can be used by the plants or the algae, or also by animals or other organisms that consume those as a source of energy for the cells by the process of cellular respiration. Plants also undergo cellular respiration, and as a result, they release some of that energy back into the biosphere's heat. But ultimately, cellular respiration, the process is to produce ATP for the cells to use for cellular processes. Now remember, autotrophs use sunlight to make food. That includes plants and algae, and there are certain other organisms like cyanobacteria that can undergo photosynthesis as well to produce food in this way. They're all called autotrophs, and they use the energy from sunlight to make food. In this process, the solar energy is converted to chemical energy. Remember, we're not creating or destroying energy, but we can transform it from one type to another. And then they receive their energy by breaking down the food that they produce, the glucose that they produce to make the starches and other molecules that the plants and algae make. They still undergo cellular respiration to produce ATP for their own uses. Heterotrophs, of course, consume food. This includes animals. It includes fungi. Many of the unicellular organisms that live in water are also heterotrophic, as well as certain bacteria. And they have to consume their food from some other source. They have to eat food or consume it in some way to get energy for their cellular processes. So to recap, energy flow goes from the sun to the producers, and then to the primary and secondary consumers, and eventually down to the decomposers. At all levels, some of that energy is lost in heat. And remember from previous learning also that only about 10% of the energy that is stored in one particular step on this trophic cascade is passed on to the next level, and to the next level, and to the next level. So as you move farther away from the source, from the plant, there is less and less of that original energy that has been stored that is available for organisms to use. And of course, in living things, the energy-providing molecule that is most commonly used for most processes is adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. Remember, it is composed of an adenine, the base from RNA, ribose sugar, and then it has 3 phosphates attached to that main part of the molecule. Here's the adenosine, the adenine, and the sugar, and then our 3 phosphates attached there. This molecule stores energy from the breakdown of food in the process of cellular respiration. That energy can be used to power all of the activities of cells. And the energy is released from ATP when a phosphate is removed, changing ATP to ADP, and then there's that phosphate that's added onto another molecule to give it the energy to do another kind of reaction. Vocabulary that we'll encounter in this part of the unit is included here. You can pause here to write down words if you need to, but you also have a list in your notebook. So photosynthesis is composed of two main parts. They are called the light reactions, and by some people they're called the dark reactions. We also call the dark reactions the light independent reactions or the Calvin cycle. I prefer either the Calvin cycle or the light independent reactions to the term dark reactions because, in my opinion, dark reactions gives the impression, the false impression, that these processes can only happen in the dark, and that is not true. So in this whole process occurs in the chloroplast. There are the two parts. The light reactions include changing the light energy into chemical energy in the light reactions, and then using that chemical energy with carbon dioxide to make food in the Calvin cycle. And all of this occurs in the chloroplast, which, remember, is an organelle with two membranes, has its own DNA and its own ribosomes. There are thylakoid membranes inside the chloroplast that are these stacks of these sac-like membranes called thylakoids. There is a cytoplasm part of the organelle called the stroma, and some of the reactions, the light-dependent reactions, occur in the thylakoid membranes, and the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle, occur in the stroma. The overall process, of course, is carbon dioxide. It takes 6 molecules of carbon dioxide plus 6 molecules of water in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll to produce 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 molecules of oxygen that are released as a byproduct. As we stated before, there are 2 stages of photosynthesis. In the light reactions, the energy is captured from the sunlight and then converted to chemical energy. It's temporarily stored in the form of ATP and another molecule, another energy molecule called NADPH. And then that chemical energy that is stored in those 2 molecules then, in the second part, in the Calvin cycle, powers the formation of the organic compounds in the form of glucose. Of course, the light reactions occur because there are pigments in the thylakoid membranes. The pigments, by definition, are light-absorbing substances. The main pigment involved in photosynthesis is chlorophyll. This is what makes plants green. It's found in the chloroplast. Its structure is similar to that of a phospholipid, although it doesn't have the phosphate part at the head. It has this ring of hydrocarbons with the magnesium compound in the middle of it, and it is able to absorb energy from the sun. As it absorbs that energy, is able to convert the energy from solar energy to chemical energy. Of course, when we look at the electromagnetic spectrum, remember that the visible light spectrum is a very small part of the overall electromagnetic spectrum, and chlorophylls are going to absorb light mostly in the violet to blue range of colors and in the orange to red colors. So around 400 or so nanometers to around 650 to 700 nanometers. Photosynthesis, like we said before, occurs in the chloroplast. Each one of the chloroplasts is filled with these stacks of membranes called the thylakoid membranes. The thylakoid comes from a Greek word that means sac, because these membranes have been described as sac-like membranes. A stack of them is called a granum, and you can see here in this smaller inset here, you can see one of the individual thylakoid membranes. You can see the phospholipid bilayer, and then it's got proteins embedded in it, and that's where a lot of the reactions occur there. The pigment molecules are buried within the thylakoid membranes in these photosystems. The interior of the chloroplast, outside the thylakoid membranes, is called the stroma, and then the main part, the light-dependent reactions, are going to occur across the membrane of the thylakoid. Of course, we know that we need energy to make food, and so we know also that the most common form of energy currency in cells is ATP, in which the energy is stored between the phosphates attached to the adenosine main part of the molecule. The other molecule that is used in photosynthesis is called NADPH. The name is nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. You don't have to know that. Just know NADPH is basically an electron shuttle. It carries electrons from the light-dependent reactions, where they're released from the chlorophyll molecules, to the stroma, where it's used in the Calvin cycle, and then the shuttle molecule, the NADPH, can go back to the light-dependent reactions and pick up some more electrons to carry them over. These high-energy electrons are used in the formation of the glucose during the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle. So to sum up, in the light reactions, remember, we're going to absorb energy from the sun and convert the energy to chemical energy in the form of ATP and NADPH, and this happens because there is chlorophyll in the thylakoid membranes in the chloroplast that allow this to happen. The series of molecules in the thylakoid membrane that allow this to happen are called an electron transport chain. And here's basically this description of what happens there. Light from the sun excites electrons that are in the chlorophyll, capturing the solar energy. The electrons cause the chlorophyll molecules to vibrate, and they pass electrons from one protein to the next, sort of like the flow of electricity. And then the energy provided by that electron is used to make ATP and NADPH. Those are both needed to make food. So here's the electron transport chain. We have two photosystems, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Light energizes the electrons in photosystem 2. Those electrons are basically removed from one of the reaction center, which is one of the chlorophyll molecules. Those electrons are then carried via a mobile transport molecule to the electron transport chain. The electrons are replaced in the chlorophyll molecules by the splitting of water. There's an enzyme here that splits water, releasing oxygen as a byproduct, and then the hydrogen ions are released into the lumen, or the thylakoid space there, and the electrons from the two hydrogen atoms, or 4 in the case of a whole water molecule, are used to replace the lost electrons in the reaction center. The electrons are shuttled over to other proteins in the electron transport chain that serve as pumps. The energy from those electrons provides the energy to pump more hydrogen ions from the stroma into the thylakoid space. Eventually, those electrons lose enough energy and are transported over to photosystem 1, where they replace electrons that have been released from the chlorophyll in that photosystem. The electrons that are lost from the chlorophyll here are then shuttled to by another mobile carrier to NADP reductase, and that produces NADPH. And that is another energy molecule there that can carry energy to the Calvin cycle. Meanwhile, we have all these hydrogen ions that have collected in the thylakoid space. They can diffuse from an area of high concentration inside the thylakoid to lower concentration in the stroma through a facilitated diffusion process through the protein called ATP synthase. ATP synthase, as its name implies, is also an enzyme that produces ATP. So as these electrons flow through the molecule, it provides enough energy to turn a rotor that is part of this enzyme that produces the energy to produce ATP. So we're getting our electrons moved, our hydrogen ions moved, sort of like water moving across a turbine, turning a turbine at a dam to provide energy. And that relieves the pressure of the high concentration of hydrogen ions inside the thylakoid membrane and releases them into the stroma. Here's a close-up view of showing the passage of the electrons from photosystem 2 through the mobile carriers, through cytochrome C, which is the main pumping protein, and then another mobile carrier to photosystem 1. The electrons from photosystem 1 are carried by ferredoxin to the NADP reductase, producing NADPH, and all of the hydrogen ions that have been transported into the thylakoid space then can travel through the ATP synthase to make ATP as well. So our two products here from the electron transport are NADPH and ATP, plus we have oxygen that is released as a byproduct of the splitting of water molecule in photosystem 2. The end products again, there's ATP, which supplies energy to the Calvin cycle, NADPH, which supplies hydrogen ions, or hydrogen and high energy electrons, and then oxygen, which is produced by the splitting of water molecule. The next part of the photosynthetic process is making food in the stroma as a result of the Calvin cycle. The food that is produced in the stroma is in the form of 3 carbon sugars called G3P or glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Okay, this occurs in the stroma of the chloroplast, and basically what's happening is we're taking carbon dioxide from the air and using that carbon dioxide to make sugar. In the process of the Calvin cycle, we start off with a molecule called ribulose bisphosphate, or RuBP for abbreviation, and it's a 5-carbon molecule with a couple of phosphates added onto it. And an enzyme called Rubisco adds a carbon dioxide molecule to that, which then makes this molecule unstable, and it splits into 2 3 carbon compounds called 3-phosphoglycerate. Through a series of reactions, ATP is added. The electrons and protons from NADPH are added, and we end up with molecules of G3P or glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate. Through 3 turns of the Calvin cycle, a total of 6 molecules of G3P are produced. 1 G3P can then leave the Calvin cycle to go to the next part of the process, which makes glucose, and the rest are going to be rearranged through using more ATP and a series of rearrangement reactions to rearrange back into 3 molecules of RuBP. This is called a cycle because the whole process continues over and over again continuously, producing for every 3 turns of the cycle 1 molecule of G3P and recycling the 5-carbon compound RuBP. The energy, of course, to do all this is supplied by ATP and NADPH from the light-dependent reactions. To recap, the CO2 comes from the air, and it goes through all of these reactions to produce G3P, which then in the cytoplasm of the plant cell can be put together to form glucose, which is the ultimate food that is produced by this whole process. So we have carbon dioxide, ATP, and NADPH that are going into the Calvin cycle, and the output is G3P, which is the main product of the Calvin cycle. To recap the whole of photosynthesis, we have the light-dependent reactions that occur in the thylakoid membranes. Our raw materials that go in are water and NADP plus ADP. The light-dependent reactions are going to produce the oxygen as a product, as well as ATP and NADPH, and then those molecules are used in the Calvin cycle along with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to produce the sugars, which is the ultimate product of photosynthesis. The whole process here is summarized in the summary reaction. Again, it's not just a simple reaction, it's actually a sum of a lot of different reactions that occur in this whole process. It happens really quickly. It happens pretty much every day in plants. And then those sugars can be used as the source of, they can be used in cellular respiration in the cell, they can be used to make cellulose or starch or other organic compounds, but all of the molecules the plant makes ultimately come from this one process of producing the sugar molecules, or the G3P, in the light-dependent reactions. And the whole process occurs, of course, in the leaf with our carbon dioxide from the air, water from through the soil, in the veins of the plant, and the light energy from the sun to make glucose and then release oxygen gas as a byproduct.